I like Daniel's outfit, by the way.
Oh, hi, Keith.
Hey, I hope that microphone doesn't explode midstream. I hope you've checked it for
Yeah, I hope
and get
not.
intercepted in Taiwan.
Yeah, they might want to target me specifically.
Well, how you guys
Yeah,
doing?
so
This is the white identity and immigration debate. And before we get into this debate, so I'm just going to make sure that I don't do too much interrupting. I'm sure that you guys have done preparation and you have a lot to talk about. It's been a point of contention on X for a while. I've seen you guys have some back and forth, and also, I think even Nick's been involved in this conversation. He mentioned this debate before, but I want to talk about some of the terms before we get into this. Would you prefer going back and forth timed answers, or do you want it to be a free flowing discussion?
my thing is that I just need a 10-minute opening. That's why I prepared. So I guess Keith said that he hasn't prepared something, so maybe like he can have a shortened opening, like 5 minutes. I give my 10 minutes, and then he has 5 minutes uninterrupted to respond. So it adds up to 10 whole minutes. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think maybe 10 minutes is a bit excessive. I think the audience would probably enjoy it more if we went back and forth. But you can read your opening statement. I wrote something brief before we started, maybe 5 minutes worth.
Yeah, after the opening, then we can just do free flowing discussion. I think that we're gonna be fine. We won't interrupt each other, and it can be just
It could be free
it
flowing
shouldn't be
after
difficult.
the introduction,
Yeah.
and then so when it goes to free flowing, if there's too many interruptions, then I'll change it, and then I'll do 90-second timed answers back and forth for about maybe 5 to 10 back and forths. If we have questions, maybe we could take some questions from the chat as well. I have some prepared, and uh, we'll go from there. But yeah, if there's too many interruptions, I'm not gonna be biased. We'll call it at that. But I think that's a good way. Do you care who goes first?
Well,
Um.
Daniel wrote the big opening statement. I
Sure.
guess he can go first.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
are you okay with Daniel? So Keith thinks that 10 minutes is long. I do think that's
Well, okay, I'll tell you what. If Daniel has like a 10-minute opening statement, I'll do my 5. He can do his 10, and then I'll do a response, and that'll even it out. Okay, so I'll go first. How about that?
so 5, 10, 5.
Uh,
That's okay with me.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
Okay, I'll keep a timer on, and this is the debate. Go ahead, Keith.
All right, so for the audience that don't know me, I'm Keith Woods. I'm an ethno-nationalist, Irish nationalist. I'm not anti-Islam, but I am opposed to the mass migration of Muslims into the West, which Daniel favors. I'm opposed to Western colonialism, opposed to Zionism, but I'm also opposed to the neo-colonialism that Daniel favors and benefits from. And my impression from Daniel, based on interactions with him on social media, however brief, is that Daniel is anti-white, and he believes that the Western nations shouldn't exist as distinct nations with distinct ethnic, racial, and religious heritage separate from his own. And despite, or maybe because, he lives in a Western country, Daniel seems to be uniquely opposed to the nationalism and self-determination of white people specifically. Because this debate came about after I called out Daniel for his repeated attacks on white identitarians. Daniel said that feeling a special love and affinity for your own people, which is the most basic human instinct, is irrational in his words and perverse. This is the healthy instinct that family, communities, and nations are built on. Daniel is really at war with this, and it's not really a difficult position for me to defend. He's at war with human nature. But I suspect Daniel is not consistent in his demonization of kinship, and like any Western leftist or whiteness studies professor, he reserves this for white people. And he's even recently begun posting about how white people's high IQ and innovation is actually the source of much of the world's evil, which is implicitly making the argument that it's the duty of the rest of the world's more noble and moral people to keep us subjugated. Now, I'm Irish, as I said, and my people didn't have a colonial empire. In fact, my people were taken as slaves by Daniel's co religionists, actually. So it rings a little hollow if Daniel is going to start lecturing me about the sins of imperialism. And that's not to even mention the hundreds of incursions and wars of aggression by Islamic empires into Europe historically. But I don't think we need to relitigate all of that. But it does seem like, based on some of Daniel's recent posts, maybe because he wanted an easier position to defend in this debate, that he has walked this back a little bit when he was challenged on the obvious hypocrisy and disrespect of this position. So when he asserts he's not anti-white, you can ask him if he believes that white Western ethnic groups should be allowed to have their own countries where non-white Muslims aren't allowed. It's a simple demand. White people do indeed face many problems, as Daniel enjoys pointing out, and I'm sure you'll hear a lot of it tonight. You know, low birth rates, feminism, sexual degeneracy. And I'm sure Daniel is going to tell me, the audience, that our problems can only be solved with the input of people like him and with the wholesale adoption of Islam. People, apologists like Daniel, you know, present Islam as a catch-all solution to our problems. Understandably, it's his religion. But the reality is the Islamic world faces all the problems Western countries face, sometimes to an even worse degree. So you can look at Muslim countries in Europe like Bosnia, Albania, Kosovo. They all have low birth rates. Bosnia's birth rate is something like 1.3. They don't seem to be staving off the degeneracy more than any other country to any great degree. So I just don't buy it. I don't buy that Islam is the solution to all of our problems.
You have 1 minute.
Daniel will say Islam is the only solution to degeneracy, even though people hear the word degeneracy and they think of harems. Daniel will say Islam is the solution to tribalism, even though people hear the word tribalism and they think of the Middle East. Daniel will say Islamic civilization has the solution to inequality and greed, when the most extreme inequality and exploitation we see today is in Muslim countries like Dubai. And Daniel will say Islam can help us transcend racism and supremacy and racial hierarchies, even though there are Muslim countries that still today practice slavery along racial grounds with a racial hierarchy.
10 seconds.
Well, I can go over to 5 minutes and I'll just take less in the second response. But yeah, today people of European descent are under attack for their race. That's the fundamental reality. That's, you know, what I'm fundamentally working against. And it's only along tribal nationalist lines that we can defend ourselves against this attack and reclaim sovereignty in our ancestral homelands. For white people, identity politics is moral, it's necessary, and it's inevitable. If Daniel feels threatened by that, that's a shame, but there are many Muslim countries where he can be free of the West's degeneracy. If he feels a duty instead to stay and direct his energy to opposing the sovereignty of white people, while another ethnic group is currently, as we speak, genociding his brothers and sisters in the Middle East, then I can only assume that his desire is for conquest of us. But perhaps he'll surprise me. Perhaps he has a more conciliatory position, and I'm interested to hear it.
Okay, that was about 6 minutes. I'm okay with Keith still having a response afterwards. Maybe I'll lower it to 4 minutes after Daniel's response to keep it.
I don't think it's necessary. Like, I think just let Keith say everything that he wants to say. Like, I don't think we need to restrict everything. Like, he went a minute over, so what? It's fine.
Okay. So
yeah, I'm fine with. We don't have to measure the time too precisely. It's fine.
Okay. So we'll keep it to 5, and then I'll still just we confirmed it. I'll give 10 minutes to Daniel now.
Okay, I'll start. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Let me just state from the beginning that as a Muslim, I don't judge races as good or bad, superior or inferior. I also think it's disgusting to claim that one race is superior to any other. That being said, I think it could be plausible that there are real differences that exist between people of different cultures, ethnicities, and even races. I think we can acknowledge that differences between people can be more than skin deep, as long as we also acknowledge that every group can have positive and negative traits, and no one race is inherently superior to others. That disclaimer aside, my argument today is that white identitarian arguments against immigration from Keith and others are fundamentally dishonest. White identitarians pretend they have the moral high ground. They say the Japanese have their own country, the Nigerians have their own country, Indians have their own country. Why can't whites have their own country? Why are only white countries expected to accept mass immigration, not others? Whites deserve equality. They're entitled to defend themselves by restricting immigration and preventing white genocide. This sounds convincing, but it's actually very deceptive. The reality is immigration in and of itself does not lead to white genocide. Whites are fully capable of preserving their culture, their race, and their material interests even when they live in a sea of non-whites. In fact, whites have done exactly this for the past 300 years. Over the past 300 years, whites have supported the mass immigration of non-whites into lands inhabited by whites. For example, the Atlantic slave trade, which involved bringing millions of black Africans to live with whites in North and South America. White identitarians have also promoted mass migration of whites into non-white lands like South Africa, Indonesia, Algeria, etc. So historically, white Europeans have had no problem intentionally surrounding themselves with millions and millions of brown and black people. They love it. And despite being in this sea of brown and black people, these whites were able to preserve their shared blood and culture. There was no white genocide. Why was that? Well, the reason is simple. Whites could be surrounded by non-whites and preserve their white identity because they established political systems based on slavery and apartheid. These white supremacist systems operated in the US, South Africa, Algeria, India, and elsewhere. These systems guaranteed that whites exercised power over non-whites and that non-whites could never exercise power over whites. Just keep the brown and black people powerless by refusing to give them the right to vote, the right to free speech, free association, or any other political rights that the white ruling class enjoyed. With their power, whites imposed laws on non-whites designed to ensure the protection of shared blood and culture and to ensure that whites maintained and increased their control over all land and material resources in North and South America, Northern Africa, South Africa, India, and the rest of the colonized world. For example, they imposed laws banning interracial marriage, laws that forced non-whites to assimilate white culture and language, laws that forced non-whites to attend schools teaching white culture and white values. Non-whites could not take resources away from whites or alter white culture or commit crimes against whites because non-whites were denied all welfare, were forced to live in non-white areas, and were subject to special security regulations. This is how whites were able to dominate the non-white locals, and any non-whites who stepped out of line were harshly punished, tortured, or killed. In this situation, non-whites serve the welfare of whites by serving as their slaves, waiters, drivers, farm laborers, and prostitutes. White identitarians like to claim that preserving the white race requires whites to live in different lands and their own countries separate from non-whites. But historically, hardcore white supremacists loved being surrounded by black and brown people because black and brown people were their slaves and cheap labor that could be exploited to further the interests of the white man. Things changed, however, in the middle of the 20th century. There was a shift in white identitarian attitudes regarding living with non-whites. At this time, the British, French, and Dutch empires extended across the globe and had many millions of subjects, the vast majority of them non-whites. Each empire had a ruling government selected through democratic elections, but only whites could vote. Eventually, however, oppressed non-whites demanded the right to vote as well. But if this demand were granted, non-whites would be in a position to dominate elections. And if non-whites could dominate elections, that would mean they could exercise power over whites. This would be a disaster for white power. So rather than agreeing to give non-whites the vote, whites preferred to dissolve their empires, have their colonists return to Europe, and disavow their non-white subjects as equal citizens. This is how independent non-white states were created, like India, Algeria, Indonesia, etc. What's important to note is that even though whites formally dissolved their empires, they did not give up control over the globe and its non-white populations. Quite the opposite. For the past 300 years or more, whites have known that it's not treaties or paper agreements that determine which group has power. Rather, it's science, technology, and economic production that determines power. Since the Enlightenment, whites have believed that intelligence or reason, or what we might call high IQ, generates scientific discoveries leading to new technologies and economic products. So the group with the highest IQ produces the most science, technology, and economic products, and whites have historically believed that they're the race that has these special capacities. And here we come to the issue of power. Power consists in the ability to get others to do what you want. This can be achieved either through offering benefits or making threats. In other words, the carrot or the stick. Whites have the most power because their technologies and economic products allow them to offer the biggest benefits or make the biggest threats. A white country can bribe non-white countries and tell them to adopt our white cultural norms, for example, liberal human rights. And if the non-white country refuses, you just bomb them. A white country can also tell non-white countries not to do business with each other and only do business with whites. They can tell non-white countries you can't have your own independent weapon systems or nukes or bioweapons. And if the non-white countries don't immediately accept whatever the white countries dictate to them, then the white countries simply bomb them or starve them via sanctions or some combination of the two. This has basically been the foreign policy status quo of white countries since the end of World War II. Whites have held that since they have the highest IQs, they'll always have much more science, technology, and economic production, which means that they'll always have more power, enabling them to control non-whites across the world. And this control can be exercised even if non-whites are formally independent on paper, as indeed they are, according to the UN Declaration since the mid-20th century. What we have today is a transition from formal white empires prior to World War II to informal white empires after World War II. But here is where things get interesting with immigration. Since World War II, there has been increasing mass immigration to Western countries from non-white countries. This has happened at a time when white birth rate is steadily decreasing. As a result, non-whites are gradually becoming a significant portion of the population in many Western countries and may become a majority in the coming decades. Moreover, due to the civil rights movement, post-World War II laws in Western countries grant full citizenship and voting rights to these immigrants and their children. Hence, for the first time in the past 300 years, non-whites are in a position to exercise political power over whites and challenge laws which promote assimilation to white culture and ensure white control over land and resources. It's in this context that a new white identitarian movement has arisen, which focuses on the dangers of immigration, arguing that immigration is evil, discriminates against whites, and threatens their future existence. But again, this is deceptive. The issue is not immigration in itself or whites and non-whites living together. White identitarians have traditionally had no problem with whites and non-whites living together. The real issue is non-whites exercising power over whites through immigration paired with democratic voting and equal rights.
90 seconds.
White identitarians want to eliminate this threat of non-whites exercising power over whites. Meanwhile, white identitarians are not concerned about eliminating white domination over non-whites and destroying non-white religions and cultures as they've been doing over the past 300 years. Now, white identitarians have no hesitation in affirming on paper that non-whites are entitled to independence, their own countries, etc. But this is simply the status quo that has existed since World War II, when the UN declarations confirmed that non-white countries have independence. But the reality has been that those non-white countries have been nonetheless dominated politically and economically by white superpower nations. White identitarians pretend to care about inequality, but they show no concern for this massive inequality. Furthermore, white identitarians fully expect that given their higher IQs, white societies will have many more new technologies and economic products than non-whites, which means that in practice, they'll continue to dominate non-whites. The only way to end white domination of non-whites in practice would be to ensure that whites do not possess significantly more technology and economic products than non-whites. This could be done through global programs of taxation and redistribution, or through global limitations placed on technological and economic development. But white identitarians never mention these things because they oppose them, and they oppose them because they're either indifferent to white domination of non-whites or actively support the maintenance of such domination. Yet despite this fact, they cry out about the dangers of mass immigration as it is the one thing that makes them vulnerable to domination by others.
Okay, that's almost exactly on time. So we'll give Keith 5 minutes to respond, and then we can go to the free flowing discussion. Keith, are you ready?
Yeah, sure. I may not use the 5 minutes, but yeah, look, I laid out in my opening statement what I thought Daniel would argue, what follows from his belief, and I'm happy with his opening statement because there it is. He's laid it out very clearly, which is a long rant about the sins of white people, about all of the evil things that white people did, and a conclusion, as I said, that essentially he believes that white people have to be subjugated by the rest of the world who are more moral, more noble, who aren't prone to these destructive tendencies. He let it out there at the end that there needs to be like technological limitations on the white world, that this is the only way we're allowed to have our own countries, as if the rest of the world has us in this state of subjugation. I mean, the absolute nerve of this. I mean, Daniel, you are Persian and you are Muslim. Like, for you of all people to talk about imperialism and conquest and expansion, you know, that's like the ultimate combination. And once again, I'm Irish, and this argument you're making that, oh, well, you had the original colonialism and then white identitarianism was just this like neo-colonial pivot. Well, the nationalism of Irish people and of many other European countries pre-exists that neo-colonial pivot and was never connected to those things you laid out there. And if you wanted to, you know, tot up the record of slavery and imperialism, well, the Arab slave trade in Africa enslaved far more people than Europeans did. I mean, by some estimates, it's anything from like 11 to 20 million plus. They castrated these slaves. About half of them died in the castration procedure from overbleeding. Also, what you said doesn't follow that the colonies were demanding voting rights, and so then there was like a pivot to nationalism. I mean, that's just ahistorical. The empires declined for various reasons, and then these countries, the politicians in them, invited the people in. You know, the flood of immigrants, including Muslims, that are in places like the UK now, the vast majority of them came since the 1990s. Okay, there was some immigration from the Caribbean after the Second World War. Again, that was at the behest of the politicians. And this argument you're making that somehow this post World War II world order is built on racial thinking and white supremacy. Again, this is just like whiteness studies nonsense. I mean, the whole post-war order was based on this deconstruction of race, this doing away with racial thinking. You had the UNESCO statement on race that said it was purely environmental, that races don't exist, all there is ethnicity, which is culture. So the whole post-war system is actually built on a repudiation of what you're saying is its justification. But yeah, your argument essentially is that whites are uniquely evil, uniquely imperial and expansionist, and so therefore the rest of the world has to subjugate them. And again, if we want to tot up the conquests of Islam or of any other country, but obviously you selectively apply this to white people, and I think anyone that's objective looking at your statement there can see that there's clear anti-white enmity. You know, you talk about the intermixing between whites and the people they conquered, and this kind of slave dynamic. Well, these are all arguments against colonialism, arguments against white supremacy. I mean, all those examples show that it's best for these people to live separately, surely.
Okay, you have a minute and a half, or we'll go to free flowing discussion here. Do you have a response, Daniel, or can we get into specific questions that I have?
No, I have a lot of things to say, but
okay.
So
Let's go into free flowing. We'll go into free flowing, and then once we reach like a point of contention or something, I have a few questions to ask. So let's go free flowing here. If there's too many interruptions, like you can make sure to ask each other questions and everything. If there's too many interruptions, I'll go to 90 seconds each. But go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, so I don't know where I said that whites should be subjugated. I don't know, recall saying that. Keith keeps wanting to portray me as if I'm an enemy of white people or I hate white people.
Well,
I never said that
like
whites should be subjugated. I never said
well,
whites should be
there's a global
subjugated.
agreement to limit white people's technology.
Well, I didn't ever said, first of all, that whites shouldn't have a homeland. I never said that. But the question is that when whites have had their own homeland, historically, they have used their, whatever you want to call it, high IQ or their Faustian spirit to dominate non-white. So you want to present yourself as advocating, a peaceful world where whites have their own countries, blacks have their own countries, Asians have their own countries. And I'm saying that that kind of arrangement is not sustainable. Why? Because whites have historically and continue to this day, even if it's not under the name white nationalism, they continue to dominate the non-white world, the global south. How do we prevent that kind of dominance? How can we prevent that power discrepancy that creates the dominance? And the other thing that should be noted is that what I responded to you about on Twitter is the attack as other races as being inferior. That blacks or Haitians, they are inferior. They eat cats and dogs, and they have this kind of inferior culture. You interestingly didn't mention any of those points in your opening because you want to present a kind of equality argument that whites should have their own countries just like blacks and Asians have their own countries. But you missed the what you and many of your followers have posted about the inferiority of other races. So that is something that needs to be objected to, and you need to justify that. Why should we consider it to be whites inferior? Because if you make the family argument, like we're just a family, it's a white family, the European whites, okay. But if it's a family issue, then you should just not want any outsiders, including the high IQ ones. But your argument on Twitter, at least, and the argument of many of your followers, the people in the chat, is that these people are low IQ. That's why we don't want them. They're low IQ. They eat cats and dogs. They're murderers. They're killers because they're black, because they're Arab. That's why we don't want them in our countries. That's not a family argument. That's a supremacist argument.
Yeah, well, like, I mean, again, I'd like you to spell out exactly what this arrangement is you have in mind that's going to stop white people becoming colonial again. You're talking about some kind of taxation system or some kind of limitation of technology. I mean, again, if you want to go through the historical record, Islamic empires have been far more expansive and aggressive than European empires. So this argument could easily be turned back around on you. As far as the IQ thing, no, I don't support high IQ immigrants coming to the West either. I support ethnically homogeneous nation states, but people are different, right? Our modern liberal system that you claim to object to, it rests on this myth of equality, that everyone is born as this blank slate and that anyone can come to the West and become a Westerner just by imbibing the culture, maybe over a generation or two. And the reality is there are profound biological differences between groups. And the purpose of highlighting these is to show, the most immediate ways in which these people aren't compatible with our way of life. That doesn't mean anyone that's an individual that's part of that group is necessarily inferior. It's not ascribing some moral weight to this. Kenyans are superior in running. Different ethnic groups have their own superiorities and inferiorities, but it is to say that these people aren't compatible with the kind of societies we want to live in. I mean, in Haiti, they've cut down 98% of their trees. They've destroyed their coral reefs. It's one of the most polluted countries in the world. We don't want this kind of behavior in Western societies. And we are perfectly entitled to point that out. We're perfectly entitled to speak to our people, to show them what they're important, to show them how it's going to profoundly change life in the West. And that's a conversation for us. But again, you want to insert yourself into this, and you present as if, oh, well, I'm fine with whites having their own spaces. I'm fine with you preserving your culture and nations. It's just the supremacy. It's just the overt racial hatred. You just need to tone that down, respect everyone. But of course, then, if we press you on it, you say, well, here's 10 minutes screed about all of the bad things white people did. Here's how terrible white people are. And in conclusion, again, the world needs to come together to limit white people so they can't ever be a threat to us again. So it's clearly just anti-white enmity on your behalf.
I have nothing against whites that exist today, except the ones that are involved with global domination. This is something that, like, if you want to say that, oh, well, where are the white countries? Like, look at NATO. Like, is white a NATO power, a white power bloc? Like, are they majority white? Yes or no? Like, it's pretty obvious that they are. to deny maybe it's not under the banner of white ethnicity, but white power is alive and well and it exists. So it's in the interest, just like you claim that whites as a group have an interest to preserve themselves and to protect themselves and to project themselves into the future. Non-whites have the same right. If you want to be equal about it and not make a white supremacist argument, non-whites have the same interests and abilities, and one of the ways that they are expressing that those desires or that will to power, if you want, is through immigration and through voting, because it's the one point in history where they can, after, by the way, 300 years of being under the white boot, that is their opportunity to protect themselves, and to be able to live without being genocided, without being colonized, without being enslaved. By the way, I'm not against slavery. I'm not an anti-slave liberal. So that's a mischaracterization as well. The difference between Islamic imperialism and white imperialism is that Islamic imperialism is on the basis of spreading an ideology, spreading a way of life and a system of beliefs. It doesn't matter if you're white, Arab, black, Asian, South American, you can become Muslim and be part of the ruling class. And historically, that is why Islam is so multiracial, multi-ethnic, and it's been able to spread all over the world in that kind of way. That's very different than white supremacy and ethno-national imperialism, which dominates non-whites, uses them as a slave and labor class, and there is no ability to get out of that because you just don't have the right color skin. So there's a big difference there. Even Christian imperialism is not as bad as white imperialism has historically been, and white colonialism. Christian imperialism is far superior in the same way that Islam is. Why? Because many non-whites, non-Europeans became Christians. And if you look at what happened with Spanish colonialism or the Portuguese, they were able to bring in many non-Europeans into Christianity. That's superior than the kind of white colonialism that occurred in the 18th century, 19th century.
Well, thanks for making my argument for me, because I mean, you just said it there that you view immigration as a way for resentful non-whites to come into the West and essentially limit the potential political power of white people organizing around their interests. Well, that makes my argument for me as a nationalist as to why you shouldn't be here. And, you know, you're talking about NATO as some expression of white power. I mean, the people that run NATO, the people that run the EU, the people that run these, post-World War II liberal institutions, I mean, they support the replacement of native Europeans in their homelands. They support having people like you in the West. So to say that this is some expression of white power, the fact that you have NATO or you have like liberal billionaires or you have human rights NGOs that operate from the West, all of these people are opposed to nationalism. All of these people make the same kinds of arguments you do about the evils of white colonialism and whiteness. And again, what you said about slavery as well, you said Islamic slavery is practiced along spiritual lines or something. I mean, the last country to outlaw slavery is Mauritania. It's actually not outlawed there. 10 to 20% of the population are slaves, and that is done along racial lines. It's the sub-Saharan Africans, the blacks, that are born slaves of Arab and Berber Muslims. So that's just dishonest, and there's many cases of Islamic civilization historically where those kinds of racial hierarchies exist. So you're presenting a dishonest picture of history, but I think what's more relevant is what you're saying about the present. You list off your list of grievances about white people, about white colonialism, and you said that you're here as a punishment. You're here to stop us organizing. You think that brown people should come to the West.
Those are your words. I never said that it's a punishment. Those are your words. Resentment, punishment. That's your gloss.
You said that immigrants. You said it's understandable that immigrants would come here to try and limit the potential political power of white people.
Yeah, to survive.
Right.
That's the way I put it. It's a survival mechanism.
Yeah, a form of conquest.
Okay, I say survival mechanism. You say conquest. I don't know what's the language barrier here.
It's survival by limiting. It's survival by limiting
is different than
political
conquest,
power
right?
of native Europeans in their homelands.
Well, again, survival is different from conquest. The thing is that you have a problem with conquest, but you don't want to address the long history of conquest that has shaped the world that we live in. It's like you don't even acknowledge that white colonialism is a real thing that has existed. You want to talk about the dominating, conquering spirit of whites on the one hand, but now you sound a lot like a libtard. Like, whites, we're just indigenous people who want to live in our lands. And oh, it's these conquerors that are coming, these Muslims and Arabs and Haitians that are conquering us. Like, you sound like a libtard. Are you going to acknowledge the colonial history of whites? Do you want to talk about the Indo-Europeans in Central Asia? Do you want to talk about the Greco-Romans and their conquering spirit? So why don't you start by acknowledging that there is a white colonial history, specifically in the past 300 years, in line with the Indo-Europeans of Central Asia and so forth?
Well, you're asking me to, I mean, how do you want me to address this? Should we also address like Arab imperialism, and should we start removing
Sure, yeah,
Arab,
we can
North
talk about it.
Africa?
We can
And
talk.
should we address,
Yeah,
Mongolian imperialism? Are we just
yeah.
gonna
Let's
like
talk
redraw
about it.
are we gonna redraw the lines of the world until everything? I mean, what point do you want us to go back
Let's
to?
talk about it.
I'm the one that's being like,
Can you acknowledge white colonialism?
yeah, white colonialism
Did it
happened.
exist?
Yeah, it
Did
existed.
it shape the
And
world
now,
that we live in today?
yes, it did, and now
Did
it's
it create
finished.
massive inequalities in the world that we live in today?
I mean, the West has sent trillions worth of dollars to the third world to try and bring them up to our living standards. I don't think colonialism is the best explanation for inequalities. In fact, studies have been done on this that show that the longer a place was a colony of a European country, the more likely it is to be developed today. I mean, you can look at Liberia in Africa, which is one country that was never a product of European colonialism. It was actually established by freed African blacks. It has one of the lowest standards of living in the world. It has less than half literacy rate. Its beaches are destroyed by trash and litter, and it's one of the worst countries in the world to live in. So if you wanted to apply that kind of explanation, it actually turns out to be quite the opposite. And then, of course, you could look at places like Hong Kong or other places in Asia that have done pretty well after colonialism. So I don't think that really explains it. But you're obviously selectively applying this to white people. I mean, the same argument can be made about Arab
No.
expansionism. That
Arabs
Arabs should be
expanded to
limited.
different. It's a false analogy based on historical illiteracy. Like, yeah, it's also imperialism, but what are the actual sociological differences between where Arabs or not Arabs, Muslims, the Muslim Arabs or the Muslim empire, such as the Umayyads, the Abbasids, the Ottomans, when they expanded to different areas, those areas prospered for centuries. Or even over a millennia, those regions that they expanded to, whether it was Egypt, whether it was the Iberian Peninsula, whether it was Andalusia, whether it was the subcontinent, Southeast Asia, all of those areas flourished despite very different races, ethnicities. All those areas flourished. Baghdad, Iraq wasn't a Muslim region, it was conquered by Muslims. Baghdad became the capital of the Abbasid Empire. So that's the difference between Arab or Muslim conquest and white conquest. Whites created a global slave class of non-whites that served them for about 250 years until the independence movement, and then enslaved in a de facto type of slavery through the global domination of markets. Since the middle of the 20th century. That's the difference between white colonialism historically and Islamic colonialism or even Christian colonialism or other types of colonialism. White colonialism is a very specific thing. Now, I don't think whites are evil inherently. This is a system and people were a part of it. And now whites don't have necessarily the same part in that process like yourself or other followers of you. That being said, you should acknowledge the historical reality. You should acknowledge that this was a specific ideology based on white supremacy and the white man's burden, the civilizing mission to bring the non-whites to a level of enlightenment. And that meant destroying their native cultures, destroying their religions. And that's a process that continues to this day with liberal human rights programs spreading globo homo to the entire world under this kind of domination. That's what should be acknowledged, and that should be recognized as a historical fact.
Yeah, I recognize that it happened. I recognize that Arab expansion happened. I don't think it was hugely to the benefit of Europeans that the Muslim world was invading them and attacking them and trying to subjugate them for hundreds of years. Again, I'm not sure what you're really looking for here. Again, I'm Irish. Okay, my country was a victim of colonialism as much as anywhere else.
Why are you
Now
bringing
we're
up the
victim.
fact that you're Irish, though? Because you're representing European nationalism. So you're not just representing Ireland, are you? Like, are you?
Yes.
Okay, then why do you
Yeah,
bring up the fact that you're
there are
Irish?
European nations that didn't have colonial empires, and now we're trying to assert our sovereignty, our right to our homelands. And you were making this argument that because of the sins of the past, that we can't have sovereignty. This is a new
It's
form
not
of
just the
colonialism.
past; it's the future too. It's the future. It's the past and the future.
What do you
Because
mean it's
if
the future?
because look,
Countries that were
do
under
you agree
white
that whites have an
empires are more
essence? Like there's a
successful than
white.
neighbors that weren't today.
Do you accept that there is a white conquering, dominating spirit? Is that part of the white genotype as you define it?
I think the Proto-Indo-Europeans, which make up a big part of the origin of Europeans. Yes, they were conquering people. They're the original Aryans. You as an Iranian have some at least cultural descent from them. And yes, we inherited a lot from them. We inherited this kind of individualistic spirit the Europeans have. There's a lot that's noble about that people that the Europeans carry with them. But the factors that led to settler colonialism, that period of history, they're over. It's not going to come back. Britain or France aren't going to colonize Africa again. But what's happening right now by the same elites that you claim supported that system is they're importing millions of brown and black people into Europe for the purpose that actually you laid out, which is to stop white people collectivizing in their interests, because the Western liberal elite has this mythos of World War II of preventing any kind of racial thinking or collectivism around European nationalism. So you actually share the worldview of the Western liberal elites that you claim to oppose, and you pretend that they're white supremacists, which is an obvious absurdity.
I'm
Or
just
else they
taking
wouldn't be
your
persecuting
argument.
actual nationalists so hard.
I'm just taking the argument that is made by white identitarians that there is a white conquering essence, this individualism, all of these traits that you attribute to the Proto-Indo-Europeans as part of the white genotype, and taking that to its logical conclusion. I don't agree with the racial basis or racial analysis of the world. I don't agree with that. I think it's fundamentally wrong. I think what's more important is ideology. What's more important is religion. But if we want to take your position and the position of
If you
white
don't agree with that,
identitarians
why do
and
you think the
extend it,
world? If
if
you
we
don't
want to
agree with that, why do
extend
you
that
think the world
argument,
needs to collaborate to prevent white people from acquiring technology that's more advanced than the rest of the world?
well, if we let me answer that question. If we take this view of races being interested in the preservation of their own race, then and we assume, as you just said, that whites genotypically are a conquering people and a dominating people because of their genetics, then other races are going to want to prevent that white race from developing the technologies to conquer them in the future. That is a rational approach that they would take if they adopted your ideology or your racial analysis of the present and the future. So for you, the question is, if there were, imagine, non-whites who developed a technology that would be able to destroy white people, wouldn't it be in white interests to prevent those non-whites from developing that technology that can wipe them out? Yes or no?
Yeah, I mean, this is just pill pull at this point.
No,
You
yes or
said
no.
it.
It's a simple question. The Chinese develop a kind of technology
Yeah, I'm sure
that can wipe
non-whites, of
out
course,
whites,
non-whites see
can
it.
wipe out
Of
whites.
course,
Yes or
non-whites
no?
see it. Of course, non-whites see it as in their interest to come to the
No,
more
no. Is it in
advanced
the interest
West,
of
to have a higher
whites to
standard of living.
prevent the
That's why.
Chinese?
That's why you're here.
You
You're
can't answer
talking
the
about
question.
how
It's very
Western
interesting.
colonialism forced these people to come to the West. This was an expansion of colonialism. I mean, you're here because you have a better standard of living. You enjoy living off the white man's technology and the comfort he offers you. You're operating
Oh
on it
yeah,
now,
we're so
and
happy.
then you use it.
We're so
Yeah,
happy
and
with
then
the
you use it
globo
to
homo
spread
that whites have
resentful
developed.
bile.
We're
You know,
so
you have an
happy that
Islamic
we can't get
civilization you could
married.
return
We're
to
so
right now.
happy we can't have children. We're so happy about all the benefits of the white race. Yeah, you got it,
Why
Keith.
don't you? You could move to Iran, right? You're
No, we
Iranian.
can't. No, we can't because globo homo is preventing the Iranians from being able to live traditional lives as well.
Yeah,
We will
okay.
get sanctioned and we will get bombed. Do you know that Iran has sanctions on it, right? And a lot of those
Okay,
sanctions have to
so
do with
all
liberal
of the
human
Muslim
rights.
world suffers
Liberal
from the
human
same
rights.
problems, but that's also the white man's fault.
Okay.
I mean,
No, no.
can you put a number on it? Like,
Can you just answer? Can you
what's the
answer the
amount of
question that I
gives?
gave you?
What's the amount
Can
of
you
gives
answer the question?
that white people would have to give you to say, okay, it's a fair deal, and now we can like live amongst ourselves without having Haitians, 20,000 Haitians getting dropped in towns in Western countries. Can you put a number on it? Because I think that a few trillion has been given to Africa at this point. The countries that were colonized are more developed than ones that weren't. I mean, what would kind of even the scales here? How much can you put a number on it?
Notice how you avoided answering the very clear question that I presented to you. The Chinese are developing a technology that can wipe out the white race. Would it be in the interests of whites to prevent the Chinese from developing this technology? It's not a theoretical question either, by the way, because who knows? Genetic engineering and AI could one day produce in China a kind of technology that wipes out all the non-Chinese. It's theoretically possible. And in fact, the US is constantly sabotaging Chinese superconducting or semiconductor markets and trying to sabotage their technology. So it's not theoretical. Is it in the interest of whites to prevent a kind of technology that can wipe out the white race? Yes or no?
Sure.
Yes. Okay. So why wouldn't non-whites have the same exact impetus when it comes to white technology, when it comes to white techno dominance of the world?
Well, look, I'm glad, like I said, I'm glad that you're asserting that whites are doing this non-whites are doing this as a way to weaken white people, to weaken white countries, to stop their ability to assert themselves. Because again, that's the argument I'm making as well. But I just want to say to white people, this is what these people believe. This is why they say they're here. And you can't really negotiate this as you can negotiate with this, as you can see. Daniel has deep anti-white resentment. All you can really do is remove these people, keep them out of your society. They don't really listen to reason on these kinds of things. And this argument you made is pretty weak as well about, oh well, Europeans have this proto-Indo-European admixture. This is a result of this is what caused their conquest, and so in the future they're going to be like this. I mean, Europeans also have a strong degree of individualism, a strong sense of equality, and that's also what led to today, where you have people that believe that you can take someone from Somalia or Eritrea or Haiti and bring them into the West and give them full equal rights, and they will just be as reasonable and productive as every other white person that was born into that society.
You can see that
But
the
like
whole argument when you said that whites have an interest to stop the Chinese from developing technology that would allow the Chinese to control whites and permanently enslave whites as a slave class for the rest of eternity. You said very clearly whites have an interest to prevent the Chinese from developing those technologies. So you have a lot of resentment for Chinese. You have a lot of hatred. Like, why don't you let the superior Chinese develop those technologies, Keith? Why don't you allow them to enjoy the free market? You be in your own country and just wait for the Chinese or the Koreans to develop the technology, or the Japanese to permanently enslave the white race. Why don't you let them do that? That's what your argument right now is against non-whites.
Well, no,
And
I'm
it's
pretty
ridiculous.
consistent. I'm pretty consistent.
really.
I oppose the extermination of racial groups. I'm an ethno-nationalist. I support
Where did I
self-determination.
advocate for the extermination of the white race? Where did I argue that? That wasn't a part of my argument at all. I didn't even question
Yeah,
the basis
I'm
of there
trying
being
to
a white
engage.
race.
I'm trying to engage in this hypothetical with you, okay? But
Okay.
I'm an ethno-nationalist, okay? I support self-determination for people. If an ethnic group wants sovereignty, wants a state, I support that insofar as possible. So it doesn't make sense for you to make this argument that, oh well, you want white people to have their own spaces, and you support other people having their own spaces, and you're post-colonialism. but also, whites did colonialism, so non-whites need to come into your countries and oppress you. It's like, what would satisfy you from a white person? Like, what would it take for you to support white people having their own states? Clearly, there's nothing, right? Because even if a white person comes along and is a consistent ethno-nationalist and says you can have your own spaces, you can have your own traditions, you can have your religion, we want our spaces. Colonialism is done. We're in this post-colonial era. Those conditions are gone. That's not enough for you because you have XYZ list of grievances from the past, ignoring.
You just said you're not appreciating the contradiction that you made. You just said that the Chinese should be stopped. There should be restrictions placed on the Chinese if they had the potential to develop technology to enslave the white race. You're not letting them just have their own country. You're not just letting them have their own indigenous land that they can live and survive and have their families. You're not in favor of that. What you just said is that there should be intervention. They should be stopped. Why? Because the technology that they could develop will enslave my people. You understand that argument when it comes to whites, but you reject it when it comes to non-whites. That's the contradiction.
No, your hypothetical would be great if white Western powers were working on racially subjugating the rest of the world. You know what they're actually working on? Is bringing millions of people just like you into the West and demographically replacing their native population, so there actually can't be nationalist population.
Maybe the people who are doing that are afraid of what whites have been doing for the past 300 years. Maybe they're traumatized and they have a lot of resentment, and those people, that special tribe of people who's doing that is deliberately doing it because they've experienced what whites have done to them specifically as a group or Europeans have done to them for centuries. Maybe it's their self-defense mechanism. They don't want to suffer from that again, so they are deliberately pushing for migration into those countries. Yeah, it's a kind of weapon. It's a self-defense mechanism that, by the way, you just acknowledged as rational. You said that whites should prevent the Chinese from developing technologies that would allow them to enslave whites. You agree with that logic?
No, your hypothetical doesn't make sense. I mean, obviously, specifically stopping racial extermination, it doesn't expand to stopping self-determination like this for people with a history of colonialism. Again, that could apply to any people with a history of colonialism. It could apply to Arabs. It could apply to the Muslim world. I mean, this argument makes no sense, honestly.
No, it's this kind of the difference between Arab colonialism or Muslim colonialism.
You're making the argument that Jews are behind the Great Replacement, and you have also this kind of whiteness studies view that white people basically oppressed Jews into being anti-white. Is that what you're saying? That they were just minding their own business and they were just oppressed into supporting these policies by the evil white man? I mean, this is like exactly what you get from like Noel Ignatieff. This is like a Jewish whiteness studies professor is lecturing me.
That's a complicated history. I was just pitching that potential idea, but the point was that the logic.
I wasn't even talking about Jews specifically. I mean, the Western elite, the native Western liberal elite, support this as well. They agree with you. They want to bring in millions of people like you to replace the natives.
Yeah, exactly. The many white globalists are in favor of these kinds of policies as well. So I agree. It's not limited to just Jews. Maybe you should tell some of your followers that make that point. But the difference between Muslim imperialism and white colonialism is the technology factor. The technologies that have been developed are so disastrous, like they're threatening the future of the human race. We're talking not only about nuclear weapons, bioweapons, chemical weapons, but also AI technology, genetic engineering technology that allows literally the human body to be changed and morphed, human psychology to be changed using pharmaceuticals, implants now that can be used to radically revision and revise what the human being even is. So this is threatening the human race itself. And this is a kind of technology that has been spread because of this worship of science, the worship of individualism, the worship of this kind of conquering spirit, like these kinds of values, white values, which in other contexts you'll praise and you'll beat your chest about like, oh, we brought so much technology and wonder to the world. Those technologies are exactly what are causing the potential extinction of the human race. And that's why I responded to you when you made this condescending remark that, oh, the white people have given you so much infrastructure and whatever. I said, yeah, you've also brought us a lot of homosexuality, breakdown of family, breakdown of marriages, feminism. This is also the gifts of the white nations. Like, thanks a lot. So that's the difference. Muslims didn't spread globo homo. Muslims didn't spread a kind of ideology that will destroy the human race or that will destroy a communal sense of identity. Those are things that have been brought through European imperialism, and we're still suffering from that. And the future is quite bleak. The future is quite bleak because of that ideology.
Yeah, I mean, I don't buy all of this sci-fi stuff about transhumanism, but in any case, I'm opposed to that. So again, what more do you want? You get a white person that they say they don't want a foreign colonial empire, they don't want transhumanism and runaway AI, but that's not enough for you because, well, there are other white people that do and have historically, so whites can't have sovereignty. I mean, this is kind of the structure of all your arguments. If you want to talk about the kind of technology whites actually brought to the Muslim world, I think it lifted them up a lot. You got the Green Revolution of white people, lifted millions of your people out of poverty. I think there was a huge famine in Iran in the early 20th century. The technology we're communicating on right now, invented by white men. You know, you like to go on social media and bash white people and blame them for the spread of this degeneracy. You say you can't live in Iran and get a wife because of the white man. It would be nice to get some appreciation for all of the incredible technological advancements that you enjoy if you're gonna take that stance.
No, like I'm not pro technology. Like I think that the Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. I'm not pro technology. I think some technology is fine. Obviously, human history has had various levels of technology, but something significant happened after the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment that took things to a whole other level. And this has to do with higher IQs, the Flynn effect, where IQs are increasing because of nutrition, because of Western style education, emphasizing science and math. And this has taken us to an entirely new era that threatens the future of the human race. And what I wouldn't want to have a racial analysis. I want to focus on the ideology of liberalism, of this kind of technocratic globalism that is threatening the human. That's what I want to focus on. But then when a white identitarian like you or some of your associates come out and say, look at these low IQ Haitians, they're so dumb. Look at these low IQ Muslims, these Arabs, they're so stupid. We have to teach them everything. When you invoke the IQ argument and this kind of superiority argument that we invented the telecommunications, we invented the airplane, space flight, all of these are the white man's gifts to the rest of the world, then obviously the response is going to be to point out the problems with these technologies and how we are living in a dystopia, which on every other day of the week, white identitarians will acknowledge, yeah, we live in a hellscape, the world is going down the toilet. You'll acknowledge that every other day of the week, but on the one day, if you're talking to a Muslim or you're talking about Haitian conquest, then suddenly you're a white triumphalist. Like, yes, we have developed all of this amazing technologies that we are benefiting today. Do you not see the contradiction in that? And you specifically, you're a traditionalist. You care about the white traditions. You're a perennialist. You care about history and the past. This increase in IQ or the worship of IQ as this bastion of or this kind of panacea to solve the world's problems and lift the world out of poverty. The increase in IQ is the number one thing that creates the destruction of tradition. The reason that you have so much more atheism, the reason that you have so much more liberalism, that's associated with high IQ. Lower IQs are more traditional people. Lower IQs respect religion. They believe in God. But your ideology and some of your fellow white identitarians want to eat your cake and have it too. You want to say white IQ is so high and we bring all these gifts to the world, but then you bemoan the fact that all of your traditions are going down the toilet. Your sense of community, communal identity is being flushed down the toilet. These things are related. Can you acknowledge that? Why don't?
Well,
Oh,
you've
and by
talked
the
more-
way, yeah, go ahead.
You've talked more about white IQ than I have in the last hour, but I don't think if you value spiritual advancement, if you have a traditionalist view of the world, the idea that the ideal state is to have a bunch of 70 IQ people following dogma that can't be productive in art, in any kind of innovation, in literature. The idea that that's a more spiritually valuable world because any kind of higher intelligence or innovation necessarily leads to degeneracy and destruction. I think that's a very grim nihilistic worldview. It's not who we are as Europeans.
Wait. This is not how you are as Europeans. So what do you think the white IQ was 200 years ago? The average white IQ. Was it higher or lower or equal to what it is today?
I think it's hard to measure that. I think it was probably slightly lower because brain sizes have increased in the
It was
last
a lot
century or
lower.
two.
So if you look at the IQ,
No, I think you're wrong. I think
it
you're going to
was
pull up like
in the
IQ studies
70s
from
and
the
80s.
early 20th century that
The
said
70s,
Yeah, those aren't
yeah, the
accurate.
70s and 80s. That's what the IQ level was for whites. It was much
No, that's
lower.
not
That
accurate.
you acknowledge that's lower, but in fact it was much lower. You didn't have 120 IQ whites inventing the automobile 500 years ago, or in the steppes of Asia with the Proto-Europeans. The IQ levels of those people was sub 100, and that's partly why they were conquering people. That's partly why they had this idea of going and conquering the world from the steppes of Asia as Proto-European, Indo-Europeans. So now, like, you want to complain about the low IQ non-whites, but the white genotype expresses itself differently in different contexts. So the white genotype now, in the context of a post-industrialized, Western-educated, industrialized nation, it's going to be higher on average. But if you look at a pastoral society or even an agrarian society, agricultural society, within that environmental context, the white phenotype is actually a sub 100 IQ, equivalent to the Haitians and the blacks and the Africans and the Indians and the Arabs that you're criticizing today. And that's why in those countries right now, if you go to many parts of the global south, they're very traditional. They value marriage. They value family, they value group identity, in-group identity. There's an association with higher IQ and less traditionalism, less religion, less communal identity, less in-group identity. But you have to acknowledge that there's an inverse correlation between IQ and these values that you purport to care about.
Yeah, that's false about the European IQ being 70s in like the 1800s. If you look at anyone that's actually studied that and written on it, there's an effect where people weren't familiar with standardized testing when they were taking those tests. And if you account for that, it was probably more like the low 90s. And an increase in brain size in the century since probably puts it up to around 100. That doesn't mean that someone in Africa now that has a 70 IQ, if you bring them to the West, is going to go up to 100. It's not the same thing at all.
I never made that argument. I didn't say that.
Well, you said the IQ of European pastoralists would be similar to Africans or other low IQ groups, and so
yeah, that's true.
And the implication is that it could equalize, obviously, right? But that's not true.
I didn't make that claim. You're just projecting that onto me. I'm saying that the whites of history, they had sub 100 IQ. So if that makes them so inferior and so incapable, if sub 100 IQ makes you basically so retarded that you can't have a civilization and you live in a mud hut and you eat cats and dogs, the majority of whites historically were sub 100 IQ. So that means you would have to hate, these lower IQ whites throughout history if you apply the same standard. Just like you hate, or a lot of these white identitarians hate the sub 100 IQ Africans. The sub 100 IQ Hispanics, you hate them, right?
there were stronger eugenic effects historically in Europe, things like execution of criminals, people dying in childbirth, and so on. But there's a very big difference between a group that has kind of a maximum of 100 brought up with nutrition and modern technology and so on, and was in the low 90s, versus a group that has like a maximum of high 70s, like American blacks probably have an IQ of around 77, 80, and they're currently at 70 due to nutritional effects. That's still like a world of difference, just because there's been a slight improvement on the margins.
I'm not denying that there's a difference, Keith. Please use that high IQ to follow my argument. I'm not denying that there are IQ differences. In fact, I've acknowledged this. Like there can be racial differences in IQ. I'm just not an IQ fetishist like you. I don't think that high IQ is the end all be all. But try to follow my argument. I'm saying that if you have this view that low IQ people below 100 IQ are just incapable of developing civilization, they're incapable of living like civil people without murdering each other, if that's your view, that often white identitarians accuse the Haitians of, or black Africans of, or Arabs of, Hispanics, then your argument applies equally to the majority of white people historically, because, as you acknowledge, they had sub 100 IQ. That's a contradiction. Why? Because you acknowledge that, no, the white people of history were achieving great things. They were great people. And this is a tradition that we have to be proud of. It's a heritage that we have to be proud of. You're proud of sub 100 IQ people. That's my point. But when it comes to non-whites who have sub 100 IQ today,
yeah, well, you
view them as inferior.
You're just mischaracterizing me, right? Because I'm not an IQ fetishist, right? I think Southeast Asians, East Asians, Ashkenazi Jews probably have a higher IQ than Europeans. That doesn't mean I want to fill my country with them, right? I will say historically, Ireland, due to underdevelopment, had a slightly lower IQ than the rest of Europe. But Irish people are my people, right? That doesn't mean that I love them any less, so I feel any less loyalty to them. So you're just imposing this kind of mischaracterization on me that, oh, well, you're an IQ fetishist, and so therefore you have to reject people in the past if they had lower IQ and embrace people if they have higher IQ.
That's the implication of what you say. When you say,
when we talk about an African group having a very low IQ,
when you say
it's one of the most immediate ways. It's one of the most immediate ways that we can show that this group is incompatible with our society. It's just true. If you import 68 IQ Somalians, they can't do a lot of the things that white people do in normal white society.
Yeah, but you would have the same. You would have the same claim. Like if we could use a time machine and bring the white pastoralists from the past, they would have a sub 100 IQ. According to this argument, couldn't have them live within white society, even though they're indigenous to white society or white Europe. Because their IQ is sub 100. That's basically the argument. That's the implications of the argument. By the way, when you say that you're not a white, you're not an IQ fetishist,
because if you plugged a European from thousands of years ago and they wouldn't fit into modern European society, therefore we have to take infinity Haitians who have 70, 68 IQ. That's your argument.
No, that's not my argument. My argument is pointing out the inconsistency of your views.
How is that
that's
inconsistent?
my argument.
That's not inconsistent.
Yes, it is, because you are basing the incompatibility of these different groups on IQ and other racial characteristics.
It's one of the most immediate ways that you can show how incompatible these people are with Western civilization.
No, if you can take a white 120 IQ liberal homosexual and take him to a time machine back to the Vikings, what do you think would happen? Would he fit in to the Viking society, the white European Viking society? Yes or no?
The Vikings had the potential to produce us. Like the Vikings are us. Somalis aren't us. They don't belong in Europe.
So it's
a simple argument.
The liberal homosexual would fit right in with the Vikings. Because he's white. They share the same skin color. That's a pretty interesting argument. That's a pretty interesting claim. They should make a movie about that, or a Saturday Night Live skit. Instead of the
it's not such a
profound
discovery. It's not such a profound discovery that there are great personality differences and political differences within races. that doesn't mean you just invite infinity foreigners because there are people in your own society that have problems. I mean, that's part of a nationalist project. Look, we want to be in power. We want those people out of power. We want fewer of those people. We want to correct that in our own societies. That doesn't mean we give up on our country and invite, conservative Christian black people and fundamentally change the makeup of our society. But again, all of these kind of hypotheticals you're using, I mean, it's all just pill pull. It's all just justification for your original argument, which is that you think non-whites have an interest in being here in order to limit the power of Europeans in their home countries. So you do see this as a zero-sum war.
You
see
agreed.
this as a
You
form of
agreed with the
conquest. You see
basic
this as
logic
a way
of
to
it.
increase your own power. And if you didn't, you could move back to Iran, but you won't.
You agreed with the fundamental logic of it, that you would say that the Chinese developing an anti-white technology to permanently enslave whites have an interest to block that or to prevent the Chinese from developing that. So you agree with the fundamental logic of my
devices,
argument.
and I oppose redoing settler colonialism. So there's no contradiction. I don't know why you can't process that.
There is a contradiction. There is a contradiction because it could be argued that the non-whites or Jews or whoever are doing the same exact thing that you would hypothetically do to the Chinese. Because again,
so it's not in our interest, so I don't want them here. So you acknowledge it's not in our interest, so I don't want them here. Simple as.
Okay.
Yeah, so then then you don't have a moral argument. Then you're not making a moral or rational argument. You're just claiming might makes right. I don't want them here because I just don't. That's not in our interest.
No, because I don't accept your characterization of history that whites are uniquely evil. I don't accept your characterization of history that whites are uniquely evil, and I didn't say whites are uniquely. And I don't accept that there's going to be a redoing of settler colonialism or genocide on behalf of white people against the non-white world, especially with how gay and leftist and liberal things have gotten in the West. And again, what is the purpose of that hypothetical if nationalists aren't arguing for that? You're arguing against this imaginary revanchist, settler colonialist, imperialist that's trying to take power, and then you're trying to make someone that's a nationalist that's not arguing for it own that. Yeah. So there's a lot of inconsistencies in this argument.
You want to whine and complain about white genocide, that, oh, the non-whites, they're coming in and they're taking over. I can be sympathetic to that. Like, if you're purely making that kind of immigration argument, a Muslim can be sympathetic to that. And I've had conversations with white nationalists who have said exactly this, that we will have our white countries and we will not intervene in the Muslim world at all. All of this foreign intervention that these Western nations have done, this is wrong. We oppose that, and we will allow Muslims to live unimpeded. Like, I could be more sympathetic to that type of argument. But unfortunately, white identitarians like you do not leave it at that. You have to make it a supremacist argument, and you have to make things disingenuous comments like, why don't you thank the white man for all the technology that we've given you? And then in 2 seconds later, you say, oh,
it would be a nice balance when you're constantly shitting on white people any chance you get, and you do a 10-minute opening rant about how much you hate whites.
I'm not an IQ fetishist, but thank me for the technology that I've granted you.
We're getting
you say you support white people having their own spaces.
One more question.
Daniel, wait. Hold on.
You spoke for
Daniel,
long
I want to let you, Keith. You can finish your final point. I want to go to questions because we're hitting a.
I have one question, Keith. Are you going to thank the Jews for their high IQ contributions? Can you thank them as a white man? If I'm going to thank you as a Muslim and a non-white European for the white contributions to civilization, you should thank the Jews for their contribution to the white race. How about that?
Yes,
they're high IQ. You said Ashkenazi Jews are high IQ, right? So thank them.
Porn and stealing nuclear secrets.
Yeah, because whites never imposed that on non-whites ever. Whites never imposed pornography and globo homo on non-whites.
The point is, you say you support the things that I'm advocating, which is self-determination for Europeans, not interested in intervention in the Middle East and redoing settler colonialism, any of that. But then you say, well, okay, you can say you support that, you can have that position, but you're going to police how we discuss this. You're going to police when we present this argument to our people and show that these people are incompatible with white societies. I mean, I don't have a problem if Muslims want to post stuff about how non-Muslim groups, or Arabs want to post stuff about how non-Arab groups are incompatible with their society, how they don't want them in their country. That's not a problem for me, okay? If Arabs want to be racist to non-Arabs and say they don't want them in their country, that's not a
Who did I
You're
police?
policing.
Did I try to censor any
That's how this
whites
whole
and
argument
say
came about.
white?
You're trying to police
No, I
that,
critique.
okay, you
If you
can advocate
critique,
for
that's
sovereignty,
policing.
but you can't talk about Haitian IQ. You can't talk about group
I
differences.
never
You
said
have
you
to be
can't
very
talk about
respectful
it.
like
You
this.
can
And you're doing
talk
this
about it all you want. You can talk about it all you want. You're just
you're
going to look
doing
stupid
this in a
when
white
I
country,
point
and
out
you're
the
trying to police
contradictions.
how we discuss our immigration policy.
You can discuss it all you want. I didn't call for censorship. I didn't say that, oh, you can't talk about this. This is so taboo. Talk about it all you want. You're just going to get debunked. You're going to get refuted. That's all I have been trying to do.
The debunking is an imaginary hypothetical of an extermination device, which somehow extends
It's
to
not
Europeans
hypothetical. It's real.
having settler
It's
colonial
real.
empires in the
It's
past,
real.
even
Right
though
now,
Muslims
all
also
of
had
these.
those empires. Persians had those empires. Arabs had those empires. I mean, it's just selective kind of anti-white enmity. Like I said, it's the same thing you get from leftist whiteness studies professors.
Yeah, I mean, try to make that equivalence, but that's what's imaginary. What's not imaginary is all of these military bases that are operated by Western countries, which are predominantly white. I don't see you advocating for the closing of all of those bases. I don't see you calling for any kind of you're not addressing the power differential that exists between Western whites and the rest of the world. So how should non-whites take you genuinely when you try to make this moral argument that we just want equality? We just want
I'm
equality.
fine with taking the
whole
military
world.
bases out of Africa and the Middle East, and also taking out all of the aid that's propping up many of these countries, taking out the Western medicine they enjoy and so on. Look, I'm opposed to Western support of Israel. I would be happy. Look, I would be happy with Iran dominating the Middle East. I would be happy with a Shia. I would be happy with a Shia Islamic Iran dominating the Middle East. I think that would be great. You know, that's Israel. You can go back to Iran. I'm fine with that. So there's no contradiction here.
Okay.
Yeah, you're not addressing the actual.
Let's move on to questions because we're starting to circle. I want to start with I want to ask both of you, but I'll start with Keith this time because we started with Daniel. Keith, do you support remigration?
Yes, it's the only way whites can recover their countries. The scale of immigration has been colossal in the past few decades in Europe. Remigration is necessary, especially when you look at demographic trends, the fact that these immigrants tend to be younger segments of the population, and you know the necessary step to white survival, restoration of white sovereignty is to remove these people from our homelands, and that doesn't have to be something very dystopian or violent. I mean, Sweden, which is very left-wing, has a remigration program. It pays people to return to their homeland. It will give them a program to help them find work when they return. Even Denmark has one of these. These are pretty modest programs, but political party, the Freedom Party in Austria, just came top in their election there. They support remigration. I think this can be done in steps. You know, plenty of countries have removed millions of foreign ethnic groups from their land. It can be done through various types of incentives, but it is necessary if you look at the demographics for white people to recover their ancestral homelands to remigrate these people.
Daniel, do you support remigration?
No. Why would I support remigration? The reality that has been created because of global dominance of the West is that the whole world is basically the brothel. The whole world is basically a ghetto, a slum that has been created because of white colonialism. And people like Keith
let's undo it then.
People like Keith want to maintain this non-white brothel in the global South that they can vacation to and they can be passport bros for.
I don't want anything. I'll be happy to have nothing to do with you, honestly. We can separate for good.
We want to maintain this permanent brothel in the world. And then when Muslims or blacks or Haitians or anyone, any non-white has the audacity to want a better life because he's crushed under the boot of perpetual poverty, then he is seen as a conqueror and invader and he needs to be kicked out. I don't have that kind of worldview. I understand that, yeah, there can be differences in racial IQ. I, as a Muslim, I'm happy to say that I, on average, might have lower IQ than other races, but I'm not an IQ fetishist. I think the world would be much better if we didn't have the kinds of technologies and the ideologies that have been developed initially by whites, but now have been like a virus virus
Well, then,
released
why are you
into the
talking about
world.
white people subjugating you under the boot of poverty then? I mean, it's white technology that's allowing these countries to have millions of people. You know, Africa receives trillions in aid. Iran, millions of people died in a famine in Iran
You keep
in the 20th
mentioning
century.
aid as if this is like a boon for the Muslim world or for Africa. Do you know who takes the aid? Do you know how foreign aid
Oh,
works?
you're gonna say
U.S. aid.
it all goes to
You,
corrupt
you don't even
NGOs
let
and the
you
people
don't
don't
even let me
receive any,
finish
and
the
it really
thought.
keeps
Yeah. Oh yeah.
the
I'm
people
just.
poorer through neocolonialism, of course.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Of
you know,
course. That is.
the
What do you
white
think?
liberals that are giving billions to this, they really want to keep Africa subjugated because it's a threat to the white man. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So when aid goes to Israel, obviously, or if it goes to Jordan, rather, if it goes to Jordan or Egypt, you'll readily recognize that that is just bribery money for Israel. The aid that goes to Egypt, the country that gets the
Yeah,
second
because it's
most
coming
amount of
from
aid.
like the U.S. State
Dude,
Department that's
dude,
run by
Sneeko,
Jews.
he won't let me finish a sentence.
Okay,
When
sorry,
the
go on.
U.S.
Question.
sends aid to Egypt, what is it? Who are they really sending aid to? For the interests of Israel, so that the corrupt elite of Egypt will maintain this peace and normalization with Israel. That's how it works. In the case of Egypt, in the case of Jordan, but for the rest of the world, obviously aid is for the purpose of altruism. Of course, Keith, you're right. That's a brilliant point.
Yeah, there's quite a difference between like the U.S. State Department, which is run by Zionist Jews, like bribing countries not to go to war with Israel, versus like multiple NGO organizations and just like ordinary people donating $60 billion to Haiti since the Second World War. That was all spent to keep Haiti underdeveloped because the white man fears so much to have a powerful black country in the Caribbean. It's obviously nonsense.
Yeah, I mean the use of aid to dominate the globe, the use of IMF funds to dominate the globe in these predatory loans. Everyone acknowledges that. Everyone, even you will acknowledge that in certain contexts. But as soon as it's attached to a kind of Western identity, then there's the disavowal. Then there's the, oh no, we have nothing. Or you just blame it on Jews. Like that's the pattern. There's no accountability for the way that Western Europeans that have been historically white have dominated the global south and continue to do so and are projected to continue to do so. The fact that now it's
Well, I don't
slightly
support
more
these institutions, but
multiracial.
again, the structure of your argument is you blame the white West for these things, and therefore they deserve the immigrants as punishment. You know, that's kind of the structure of all of your arguments. And that
I
was
just
one of the
want
weirdest arguments as
mechanisms
well.
in
The idea
place.
that
I want mechanisms
white people holiday in these countries, therefore they have to take millions of them as immigrants and replace their native population. I mean, we could still holiday in each other's countries, right? That doesn't mean you have to come here by the millions and replace natives.
Now, the point was that the structure of dominance that existed prior to World War II continue to exist today, except of formal domination. It's a de facto domination. You're not concerned with the domination. You claim to be concerned about immigration, but there's no problem with all these non-whites coming to Europe and being second-class citizens or being subjugated. Your problem is not immigration. Your problem is with their power to vote. That is your problem, because you can preserve white European identity in a sea of black people, a sea of brown people. That's
No,
actually
you
the bar
can't.
that
I don't accept that
Then
you
how did
can.
that work?
And
Then
these
how?
are
Why
these
did
are
that
our
happen for
homelands.
200 years? How did that happen
These
for 200 years?
Well, you can look at South America, where actually there was a huge amount of racial mixing, and really a lot of the Spaniards just
Because they weren't
blended
white
into
identitarians.
this
They,
soup.
they weren't white. They weren't white supremacists. The Spanish. That's prior to Enlightenment colonialism.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. I want to ask
Yeah,
the both
I
of
don't
you.
see how that follows. Okay, white people had settler colonial empires where they dominated and subjugated non-whites. So it's no problem for us to have millions of brown and black people replacing us in our homelands. Although you've already made the argument that they're there to limit white people's political power.
Why do you insist on caricaturing and strawmanning my argument? The point that I made was very simple to follow. Whites can live in a sea of black and brown people and maintain their white
These
identity.
are our homelands.
They have done
These
it.
are
They
our
have done it
homelands.
historically. Yeah,
Look,
in their
maybe
homeland.
you don't understand.
In their
Maybe you
homeland,
don't understand this. I don't know if
in
you've
their
lived
home.
in the U.S. your whole life. But
Yeah, I was born here. I was born and raised here.
Well, there's a beauty for me as an Irish person to having a homeland where people look like me, they speak like me, I can relate to them on a fundamental level. So, no, we do lose something when there's a million black people and brown people in our country. We do lose something when, as millions of pieces of data, hundreds of sociological studies show social trust declines, community declines, people's willingness to give to charity declines. This individualism
Not
that
if
you
they're
claim to
subjugated.
oppose.
Not if
Well,
they're
hold on,
servants.
this individualism that you claim to oppose, all of this increases with diversity and multiculturalism. They call it the huddling effect in sociology. People stay inside, they watch Netflix, they play video games, community dies, charity dies. All of the things that you claim to value as a traditionalist are destroyed by diversity. But you support that because you know it's bad for white people. You know it's a punishment, and that's why you support it.
It is bad. Like when you do import people on the basis of racial diversity, it is bad for collective consciousness because there's not a religion there. That's the difference with Islam. Like Islam brings a unifying communal identity as a religion where you can be different races, but you're still unified under one ideology, and therefore you can live in a very cohesive communal way. The modern liberal state,
you can
is a disaster.
You can go to Mauritania and
I agree.
tell the Arabs that have a couple of million black slaves that racial distinctions.
Mauritanians are black as well. Mauritanians are black as well. So here is a question
No,
for you.
The elite slave owning caste is mostly Arab and Berber.
Yeah, they've mixed. Have you seen a Mauritanian person? Do you know what they look like even?
Are you saying there's no like racial hierarchy to the slavery system there?
No, it's not.
There
Mauritanians are very traditional people. You can Google a Mauritanian person. Look at what they look like.
It's mostly black. It's mostly
a
black.
mix.
There are Arabs and Berbers because
they mix. Even Berbers are a mix of Arab and black and African. Like that's
and slavery is done along
It's not a racial
hierarchy.
Your facts are completely wrong about that. So did
I'm correct.
Whites
you can fact check that.
Did the South?
Should we go on to, if these are questions, I'm thinking this is quick fire round. Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask one more question. I want to ask general questions. We'll do quick fire towards the end, Daniel. I'll start with you because I just asked Keith. Daniel, regardless of whether or not you care, what is the solution to save the white race? And I'll ask the same question to Keith after.
I think that whites can maintain their identity and their heritage. I agree with the idea that people have a culture and the heritage that they desire to preserve. They have a connection with geographic areas that they want to conserve. The main threat to that is liberalism, globo homo. That is the main threat to white identity. The way to preserve a people is through shared ideology and shared heritage. So if you have a shared ideology, that's going to be a much better way to preserve your culture and your heritage. And that can be done through Islam. That can be done by converting to Islam, becoming Muslim. And Islam is not against maintaining your own distinct ethnicity, maintaining your own distinct white race or white culture. Islam is not against that. Islam doesn't say everyone has to mix with everyone else. You can maintain your people as Muslims. The problem, though, is that under white genotype, like white genes, you have a vast diversity of phenotypes that can be expressed. And that was the example of the Vikings versus the 21st century liberal homosexual that is white. They're white, but these are completely different phenotypes. If whites want to get back to a traditional way of living where there's the importance of community, the importance of family and marriage, to maintain your heritage over time, you can do that through converting to Islam. There's not an ideology that exists that can preserve that heritage better than Islam can. If you continue as a white identitarian, you can be a liberal, transgender, even other kin type of fairy, a genetic mutation type of person and still be white. You can still be white. So what does that preserve? Like what is preserved by a white person who has disavowed his tradition, has disavowed marriage, has disavowed his religion, has disavowed everything about his past and his culture, but he just has the genes. So how does it make sense to preserve white culture or white heritage, white tradition? How does it make sense to just focus on genetics? That is what has led to this kind of racial identitarianism, is what has led to the loss of white heritage and white tradition And unfortunately, white identitarians are not going to confront this reality.
Keith, same question. What is the solution to save the white race?
Well, the main issue with white people right now is the kind of naive commitment to an extreme individualism politically. Also, this idea of the blank slate, that everyone is basically born equal and then is created by culture. But that also comes from, our tendency towards individualism and to not want to judge people by groups. So white people need to have a sense of collectivism. They need to realize that diversity, that liberalism is an attack on their identity, that this is leading to very serious consequences, that there are only downsides to diversity, and to realize that the only way to reverse this is to collectivize along national lines and to push back against this. And obviously that would be done in a step-by-step process, but immigration needs to stop. There needs to be a re-immigration program. The extreme leftism, degeneracy, social decay, all the things that we probably all agree are bad, that needs to be stamped out. There needs to be a cultural change if people like us are in power. And then there needs to be efforts to raise the birth rate, whether that's financial, in terms of changing the whole ideology and incentive structure around birth rates. I don't think Islam is the solution the way Daniel suggests. I don't have anything against Islam necessarily. I think, to be fair, it's been heated with Daniel, but I don't think Daniel is really representing the Islamic or traditionalist perspective here necessarily. Like I said, this is kind of just critical race theory, whiteness studies in a turban type thing. So it's not very representative. But if you do look at European countries that are Muslim, Bosnia's birth rate is 1.3. Kosovo is below replacement. Albania, Turkey has a very low birth rate as well. So it hasn't proven itself to be super resilient in these countries. It may have other strengths, but this issue of modernity and collapsing birth rates, it's still a problem all people's face, and it needs to be dealt with, I think, on the level of the state and on the level of national collectivism.
And a follow-up question to you, Keith, because I'm not sure if Daniel has too much to disagree with what you said. Who falls into the category of remigration?
Well, obviously it depends on the country, but I think if it was a step-by-step process, you'd obviously start with illegal immigrants, first-generation immigrants, and then you'd look at it in terms of offering people that have been here longer incentives if they wanted to move back to their country. But yeah, it's non-natives, non-ethnic Europeans that are living in Europe, with the purpose of making Europe more homogeneously European.
You have any points of contention, Daniel? And if not, I'll maybe go one more question, then we can go to a quick fire round.
Yeah, I think I will disagree that Islam is not more resilient. It has been very resilient to modernization, and this is proven through World Value Survey and other quantitative measures that show that Muslims have the highest level of belief in God. Muslims have the highest level of traditionalism. Muslims have the lowest level of STDs. Muslims have the highest birth rates and family size. And on and on. You have all of these statistics. Yes, they are being subject to liberalization that is affecting the whole world, but you have to look at the gradient, or you have to look at the differential. Muslims are still a cut above, and that's because of Islam. Unfortunately, everything is going towards a normal level, or like a normalized level. Everyone's becoming one homogenous soup. As we approach the quote-unquote end of history, as Fukuyama might have said, but Muslims and Islam are more resilient because of the emphasis on traditionalism, and arguably because of our lower IQ. I think that the lower IQ is good. That is good for traditionalism. That is good for maintaining your communal values. It's good for maintaining your race. Like, if I were a racial identitarian, I would want my people to have lower race or lower IQ. Why? Because that's more conducive to preserving one's race, as opposed to high IQ, where you're becoming more analytical, you're questioning tradition, you're questioning communal identity, you're becoming more individualistic. Those are all traits that are associated with higher and higher IQ. So this is a contradiction, I think, in the IQ fetishist position.
I think some of the difference is just a time difference in terms of modernity is hitting the Muslim world later. And that's why I use the European examples, because if Islam was especially resilient, you'd imagine the Islamic countries in Europe would book some of these trends, but they're actually worse in a lot of them. So that would lead me to think that the rest of the Islamic world will come under those forces as well. I actually think what you said is correct though. Like, yeah, lower IQ people will tend to be more ethnocentric and not buy into kind of abstractions that tell them obvious things that are true. Like, a Haitian can show up in the U.S. and become a rocket scientist as soon as he sets foot on American soil. But yeah,
I
that's
mean,
true. Low
the
IQ
birth
people
rate
probably are
factor
more
that you given.
traditionalist.
Sure. So I'm glad that we have a consensus on that point. But just one thing, if you can clarify about the birth rates in Bosnia and Kosovo and Albania, you agree that they're still higher, right, than the Western European countries?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't have them off the top of my head, but I believe Bosnia's is something like 1.3, 1.4. And I think
I'm
France is
seeing
maybe 1.7.
the chart I'm looking at Eurostat, Eurogeographics. They have a chart and it's showing that it's like 1.59. That entire region is just higher than the UK or France or even Spain, Germany. Those are the much lower levels than some of these other countries that you mentioned. I don't know.
Well,
We can
the
fact
first, I
check
mean, the
that.
first, I don't have time to look at it now, but the first Google result is 1.35, and that's similar to a stat I've seen before. Czechia is like the most atheistic country in Europe, and it has something like 1.8. It's almost replacement. So they're not really booking any trends.
Okay.
But maybe that data is wrong. I don't know, but I definitely don't think they're much above Western Europe.
Yeah, maybe if you limit it to one country, but if you look at Muslims of Eastern Europe overall and compare that to different religious groups like atheists, like Christians, or secularized people,
Yeah, but a
again,
lot of
like
these people are
world
first
value
generation
surveys show that
immigrants, right?
Muslims have no, they're indigenous to Eastern Europe, and they'll have higher birth
Well,
rates.
if that was the case, Bosnia would have a higher birth rate. It's 1.35.
Yeah, I don't know if you zoom in on one particular country as opposed to Muslims that are indigenous to Eastern Europe as a whole.
What's another Eastern European country with like a big Muslim population?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. You have to look at. I'm just going based off of this Eurostat graph that I'm
Well,
looking at.
well, I mean, just name one.
Um, so you said Bosnia was 1.3.
1.3. Yeah, but you said other Eastern European countries have like subgroups of native Muslims with high birth rates. What's a Eastern European country with a native Muslim population?
I don't know if it's a majority, but you have Muslims in like Kosovo. You have Muslims in
Well, Kosovo is
Macedonia. You
just
have
a Muslim
Muslim.
country.
Yeah, so you have
That's
these
why it
different
broke up.
Muslim groups.
But
So those are
you
like,
said there were Muslim. You said there were Muslim native minorities in Eastern European countries. Kosovo is just a
not
Muslim
minorities.
country.
No, I don't mean minorities. I mean take all of the Muslims across nations in Eastern Europe, not as minorities.
But
In
which
minorities,
countries
I know.
is there
As
apart
minorities,
from
they're immigrant.
Albania, Kosovo, and Bosnia, which all have below replacement birth rates? Where else are you talking about?
But those are the numbers I'm disputing. Like you're just citing. I don't know your source, and I have a different source. We have to fact check it. So you could be right. I could be wrong on it.
Based on
I'm pretty
Google
sure on
says
those. But
Google
okay.
follows what Keith's saying about 1.35 in Bosnia, and it says the Muslim majority regions in Europe include Albania, Bosnia, Kosovo, and Albania just shifted to Christian majority.
Yeah. We can look at that. So my data, it's like we're comparing apples and oranges, I think, because my data set is looking at Muslims as a religion within those regions of Europe as indigenous, and Keith is looking at country by country. I could be completely wrong in my reading of the data, so I'll just
I would
concede
have
that.
thought Bosnia was, vast majority or nominally Muslim at least. But
Oh, they are.
I mean, people can fact check that.
Yeah, they are, but they've also are a country that has experienced recent genocide. A lot of their men were killed, deliberately targeting their men. So that's with Bosnia specifically. That's why I don't like to look at country by country, because then you get these other what's the word? Conflating factors or counter variables. So
Yeah,
that's
I
why
definitely don't think that would be enough to have a huge effect on the birth rate. But
genocide of men, maybe. I
Okay.
could be
Well,
wrong. I
I
can see.
mean,
I can see.
I mean, there was ethnic cleansing, but there was the same. Croatia and Serbia have higher birth rates. I mean, they experienced the same thing. And also, that's like the early '90s. So that's 30 years ago. So the birth rate would have recovered. I mean, that age of man would be in his 60s now. So it's the young people that aren't having kids.
Yeah, I'm not staking my claim in Muslim higher birth rates in one particular country. I'm looking at World Value Survey and the difference between liberalized countries and secularized developed countries versus traditional religious societies. And World Value Survey graphs all of
If
this.
you want another example, I'm pretty sure Iran has its birth rate is only like 1.5 or 6. It may have increased recently, but I mean, 10 years ago, Ireland had a higher birth rate than Iran.
Yeah, I think that's true. They've industrialized and liberalized, and it pushed pushed women's education to the max. So the thing about Muslim countries as well that you should keep in mind is that Muslim countries are post-communist. So communism has also, through genocide, through deliberate targeting of men, forced atheism that's been pushed on the population. Muslim countries are suffering as well from that factor.
I mean,
The confounding, like
Iran, I mean,
with Bosnia as well. Bosnia,
it's been an Islamic republic for what, like 45 years?
yeah, again, with single countries, you can find these outliers. And also, by the way, Iran is more Aryan, so that make of that
Yeah,
what
but
you
I'm
will.
just wondering what you mean by
Make
like
that of what you
atheism
will.
has been pushed top
But
down
if
on
you look
Iran.
at Bosnia, if you look at Albania, if you look at some of these post-communist countries where they're forced to become atheist and their men were genocided in the 20th century, not just one genocide, but multiple genocides, then these are major confounding factors.
I think this brings up a good question. I'm going to ask this one, and then we'll go to rapid fire, and then we can call it from here. What race or what group of people or what system of economics is to blame for the decline of the birth rate of the white race? And I'll start with Keith again.
You're asking me what group of people or what system is to
blame for the decline of the
white
yeah.
race? There's a few factors. I mean, obviously, one factor that Daniel named earlier, actually, well, kind of implicitly, there is a Jewish ethnic lobby that saw European collectivism as an extreme threat to them, especially after the Second World War. And I've written stuff about this before that around the 20th century, mid 20th century in the US, the Jewish community very aggressively focused on empowering minorities and promoting worldviews that undermined racialism, undermined ideas of nationalism. I mentioned earlier UNESCO statement on race, which was this UN statement that declared race isn't real, everything is environmental. This was used in subsequent Supreme Court decisions in the US to overturn segregation, and it was often cited in European human rights law and so on. And that was basically a group of Boasian anthropologists. They're called after Franz Boas, who was a Jewish immigrant to the US. One of his students, Ashley Montagu, was a Jew from London who was kind of obsessed with anti-Semitism. So you do kind of see this pattern of Jews that are very paranoid about anti-Semitism, that see white collectivism, forces of populism, nationalism as a threat to them, and they were certainly a powerful lobby against that. But obviously, it's not the only factor. I mean, the thing that Daniel talks about is obviously the driving force in all of this, because you could even say, well, if whites were ethnocentric and traditional at the time, they wouldn't have allowed that subversion to happen in the first place. So yes, modernity brought with it ideals of liberalism. It broke down traditional communities. It empowered individualism, atomization, and these things have knock-on effects that lead to falling birth rates. It leads people to pursue deviant, degenerate lifestyles, to adopt kind of luxury beliefs. The whole system of leftism that many people in the West hold, that is kind of anti-nature, anti-traditional. And just the kind of, the individualism of Europeans that I already named, it was kind of amenable to that kind of worldview, that kind of idealism of every man born equal, this blank slate idea of things lifting up the whole world. And those three forces kind of came together, especially in the 20th century, and especially after the Second World War, when the liberals that ran the US had the world to themselves. They could kind of make it over, and this was the order they instituted in large part in kind of reaction to National Socialism. But yeah, it's been a long process, but definitely a lot of this goes back to that reaction against white collectivism that came in the 20th century.
So to summarize, what I'll ask you more specifically, what ethnic group would you blame?
Well, I mean, obviously, the organized Jewish community is the group that has kind of most successfully undermined white interests and promoted multiculturalism. But I wouldn't say it's just the Jews. It is.
Yeah.
There are other forces at play, but certainly they capitalized on those forces, and they kind of drew out like the liberalism that was present in white people, the individualism, the value in egalitarianism. They kind of drew out certain conclusions about racial egalitarianism and kind of, like I said, manipulated the liberalism that existed to be this more kind of minoritarian liberalism that was all about like empowering minorities, empowering kind of alternative, deviant lifestyles, this kind of thing. So yeah.
Same question, Daniel. What ethnic group would you blame for the decline of birth rate in the white race?
I think it's a similar answer. Like, I think that it's mainly because of ideology. I wouldn't blame it on one particular race. I think whites, like, if you want to put it to one specific race and you're forcing me to answer that, I would say whites are who are mainly responsible for the decline of the white race. Why? Because they're the ones who inaugurated this ideology of individualism, liberalism, philosophical liberalism at the cusp of the Enlightenment. They inaugurated it, and then other races were affected by it. Other ethnicities picked it up. But if you look at the majority of whites, they are liberals. They are individualists. They want immigration as long as it's legal. As long as it's legal. So Keith and other white identitarians are in the extreme minority. Whites should be blamed. If we want to have a one race as being responsible, we would have to blame the white race.
Okay, let's go to rapid fire. If you have any more points of contention, we can go. If you want to ask each other anything specific,
I will just say, because I just looked it up briefly, Kosovo is 93% Muslim, and apparently the birth rate is 1.5. So that does kind of back up what I'm arguing. But again, maybe someone will fact check that. Maybe that's an old figure or something.
I think you have to look at communism as a confounding factor. Like, communist societies were devastated, religion was devastated, Islam was erased basically from these countries, from Albania, for example. So that's a huge confounding factor. But I think that we can look
Kosovo wasn't part of Albania, though. It was part of Serbia, so part of Yugoslavia, which it was communist, but it didn't have the kind of, if it had the kind of religious repression of other communist states, you wouldn't have had after the fall of Yugoslavia. You had Catholic Croatia, Muslim Bosnia. The religious identities really remained with the ethnic groups. So I'm not sure that would apply to Kosovo.
Well, religious identities can be maintained after communism falls. Like, look at Central Asia, look at Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. They were genocided or forced into atheism. Now they're Muslim countries, so they go back to their heritage.
That's what I'm arguing. Yeah, I don't think I don't think communism is a reason for why Islam would be weak in Kosovo right now.
No, but they were communist. It was a communist nation. That has an effect on religiosity and birth rates and communal identity. Just because you adopt, like, you are coming out of it with a Muslim identity, that doesn't mean you've started all of the same kind of traditional way of life or mentality. Like, psychologies are shifted because of communism over generations.
Yeah, but I think they had a notably high birth rate in the 90s, because when they were splitting off from Serbia, that was a big talking point that, like, these Muslims are like outbreeding us. They had an especially high birth rate. So I think it's a pretty recent decline. But again, this is all stuff we'd have to look at the data and fact check. So.
Sure.
Do you have any questions for your opponent? I'll let Daniel ask Keith, and then let Keith ask Daniel.
Sure. I can ask a simple question. Why is it the case that some of the leading white nationalists today are Hispanics and blacks. So someone like Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens, Andrew Tate, like why are the people who are leading the cause of white identitarian or saving the white race, why are they Hispanics and blacks?
Well, I don't think Candace Owens is a white identitarian. I mean, she's in
Doesn't she say white lives matter?
Yeah, I don't think that's white identitarianism. I mean, that's
So she doesn't care about like the preservation of whites, I guess. Maybe because I thought her whole shtick was, I am willing to stand up for black identitarianism, or I can acknowledge that black identitarianism exists. Why can't white identitarianism exist? I thought
I mean,
that was her
that's just
appeal.
kind of like the universal, like conservative, like calling out hypocrisy type thing. I mean, if you're a white identitarian, I'd say you're someone that really subscribes to, it's identitarian. It's an identification with white people. It's working for their interests. Same thing goes for Tate. And Nick is white, so.
Okay. So he falls under white. Okay. That's if he falls under white, then I guess a lot of Mexicans would fall under white, a lot of Puerto Ricans, a lot of mixed race Hispanics would fall under white as well. So I guess immigration from South America is in alignment with white identitarianism. That's new.
Keith, do you have any questions for Daniel?
Well, I mean, I would ask. I mean, what would it take for you? I mean, you say you in theory support white people preserving their culture and heritage, but then you all add all these caveats about the disparities and the historic injustices and so on. I mean, what would it take for you to just support white people having their homelands, being sovereign over them, removing outsiders? It seems like you're just constructing all these walls to kind of just justify this conclusion you already have, which is that you just kind of support this dominance on behalf of your own group. So yeah, what would it take?
No, the argument that I made wasn't a dominance argument. The argument that I made, it's something that I put a pretty low bar to it. I said that, okay, if we want truly to have equality and sovereignty, like if that is the goal that we're aspiring to, which is what you claim to be aspiring to, what would that actually look like? It would not look like just having a de facto separation of the races in their own countries, and you just have basically the UN saying that you can't aggress on anyone else's sovereign territory. Like that's the kind of de facto separation of the races that we're approximating. We either have it or we're approximating it today. That is not sovereignty, because the global south does not enjoy sovereignty. Non-whites do not enjoy sovereignty. They're constantly being dominated. So if you actually care about sovereignty and equality of all the nations, then you have to go beyond this kind of just handshake agreement that, okay, we just agree to be friends. Like we just agree to be separate, and that's it. You have to go beyond it by saying something like, okay, whites will avoid like these certain kinds of technologies. We will avoid development of these kinds of technological advancements, like something that goes beyond, like the details of that can be worked out. But you weren't willing to even consider that possibility. And that's kind of interesting, because you want to sacrifice the potential in this hypothetical scenario. You want to sacrifice the ability to have a white sovereign nations in Europe at the expense of the right or some kind of mandate to develop as much technology as you want for all time, despite the fact that that's exactly what threatens the sovereignty of other people who are, in what I'm arguing in this hypothetical, are lower IQ. So I don't understand like why this wouldn't be like a slam dunk for you to acknowledge. You can just undercut my entire argument and say, yeah, I would concede to that. I would concede to limitations on technology. You weren't able to do that. Instead, you were beating your chest about.
Because I've already told you, I don't support intervention in these countries. I support withdrawal, like militarily
Why?
and the aid. I don't support redoing colonialism. And I said
So
I'm
if
opposed to the and I said I'm opposed to the transhumanism and runaway AI stuff. And yeah, I think we should regulate that. So, this contradiction you're looking for just doesn't exist, all these hypotheticals.
No, because if you are going to say that, yeah, we do need limitations on white nations in developing certain technologies like AI and genetic
I think
engineering,
globally there needs to be
that's a big
limitations on
concession. Like,
transhumanism.
that's great. Like, so you do agree in this kind of global regulation, you can call it global communism, that redistributes power, and that will allow like an actual sovereignty of all nations and an actual equality. Like, that
Yeah,
was
but
my whole
your idea,
argument.
your idea
If
of
you agree, that's great. Then we've achieved a consensus in this
okay,
debate.
Keith Woods, promise not to support the
Mhm.
development of an extermination device to kill other races. Okay, that's I'll make my commitment. I'll work in the white ethno state to stop that happening.
Okay, that's great. So you are going to be against advancing science. You're against advancing technology in order to prevent this
No,
kind
I'm
of
for
dystopian
technological
future.
advancement, but yeah, I think there needs to be hard limits on transhumanism and AI. But that's global. I mean, you're attributing this to white people, but I mean, do you think the Chinese are going to limit their expansion of AI and
They should be forced
transhumanism?
to.
I
Like,
mean,
that's the
the
whole point.
Chinese are actually
They
more
should be
advanced,
forced to. The
but
Chinese
the
should be
Chinese are
forced
actually
to.
more
The whites
advanced.
should be forced to. Yeah, they should
But the
all be
Chinese are
forced
actually
to.
more advanced than Western countries in terms of things like embryo selection and these kinds of like eugenic programs. People are developing through genetic science. But that's a very different argument if you're going to say there should be like some kind of global compact to say, okay, we won't develop like super intelligent AI, we won't start cloning people. That's very different to
Yeah.
what you suggested at the beginning, which is like the moral noble people of the world should make like some kind of pact to limit white people from doing that because white people are uniquely dangerous.
No, like they are unique in their recent history, but the Chinese, yeah, the Chinese or the Japanese or any other group that starts developing or is on this path of developing these technologies, there should be restrictions and they should be forced not to be able to advance a certain level of technology. In fact, we want a lower tech society overall because we're talking not about some technology of the future. We're also talking about things like nuclear weapons, which were developed 100 years, or not 100 years ago, 60 years ago, over 60 years ago. Those also have to be regulated because the fact that certain countries have those and other countries don't, that is a big problem that creates the inequality and the oppression of all these different countries that are held hostage. Either go with what we say, otherwise we'll nuke you. So that kind of technological inequality has to be forcefully changed. Do you agree with that kind of redistribution or those kinds of limitations on technology going back to technology from the 1940s?
No, no, I don't agree with kind of undoing technology like that.
Okay, so that you don't really believe in sovereignty of all people separated into their own racial countries. You don't really
Well,
believe in
sure I
that.
do.
You believe
Sure I
that
do.
on
We
paper.
can have
You
our own
believe that
countries and
theoretically.
enjoy our
You
modern
believe
motor
that.
vehicles and televisions and smartphones. I mean, the idea that that's some kind of contradiction is ridiculous.
Yeah, surveillance technology. Like, I can't go and sit on the toilet without worrying that my phone is spying on me. Like, yeah, all countries, not just the whites, Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, Indians, they should all be limited in the technologies that they have. And again, it's not just future
I mean, if
technologies.
that's
It's also things
the
like it's also things like surveillance, telecommunication technologies. All of these things should be limited.
okay, well, I mean, you can go back to your Islamic country and make that case. And if you want to regress
Yes.
technologically, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, but I can make that case for Muslims, but the danger, the threat is from these other races or these other nations.
Okay, but I've said I don't support like runaway AI, transhumanism.
It's not
I don't
enough.
support redoing settler colonialism with
It's
nuclear
not enough.
weapons. I mean, it's like what more do you want?
Yeah, is that so much to ask? Like, just get rid of the nukes, which no one uses anyway. Get rid of the nukes. Get rid of some of this surveillance technology. Maybe get rid of some of these satellites and space technology, and then you can have a white race. Like, why aren't you willing to make that deal, Keith? At least in theory.
We have to go to space.
Do you
and we
really
have to
value
colonize
the white
Mars.
race enough to say no to satellites? Do you really have to have the Starlink? Do you really have to have the nuclear silos and the cache of nuclear weapons? in return for your white race? You can't give all that up? I'm starting to
It's a
question
Faustian
whether you
spirit.
actually
You wouldn't
value the
wouldn't
white
get
race. What?
It's the Faustian spirit. You wouldn't get it.
Maybe I should have asked this in the beginning, but I want to ask a question came up. Keith, what is white?
White is just a term used for people of European descent. It's just there are distinct races that cluster along ethnic lines. Within that, there are distinct ethnic groups. So there are ethnic Irish, Spanish, French people. There are kind of New World Europeans, people that moved to Canada and America. And over time, they lost their ethnic identities. Most of them are quite mixed ethnically, and so they're whites. They're not generic whites, but they're an American white ethnic group, Canadian white ethnic group. But yeah, it's a clearly observable, distinct race that originates from Europe.
Daniel, would you agree with that definition?
Yeah, I think that you can define whites in various ways. I think that like groups of people as races to have a reality, they can have an objective reality. It's interesting because, to say something more conciliatory, because I don't want to completely blast Keith. I know that has been a lively debate, but I appreciate what Keith does and his work against Zionism. So I just want to make sure that that's clear to everyone. But there's a hadith, like a statement of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that seems to define white people, actually. So I'm going to read this. This hadith, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "The last hour, meaning the end of times, would come when the Romans would form a majority amongst people." And then the Prophet and then it was said, "I say what I heard from Allah's Messenger." Thereupon he said, another person said, "If you say that, it is a fact, for they have 4 qualities," meaning these Romans. "They have the patience to undergo a trial and immediately restore themselves to sanity after trouble and attack again after flight." So they have a resilience. That's one quality. They have the quality of being good to the destitute and the orphans. They have a level of altruism. That's the second point. They're also good to the weak. And fifthly, the good quality in them is that they put resistance against the oppression of kings. So this is a statement recorded about the Romans, and it's a hadith in one of the most authentic collections, Sahih Muslim, of statements from the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his companions. So that's it seems like even within the Islamic tradition, there is a concept of, the Europeans, the Romans, the whites, like there is a concept there. And in this particular narration, like they are praised for these qualities, like their altruism to the poor and the destitute, their resilience, their non-acceptance of oppression from kings. These are praiseworthy qualities, and they're attributed specifically to the white race. So I am not an enemy of the white race. I'm not a critic of necessarily the white race. Just because I point out certain historical realities, I think that there can be a white genotype, like a genetic basis that you have, like you can actually trace it genetically, and actually locate a certain geographic area that is associated with genetics. This is something that's known within genomic studies, and it's hard to deny that. My problem is not necessarily with the genes, it's with the phenotypes, like how that genotype, the white genotype or the Arab genotype or the black genotype, gets expressed in different environments with different ideologies. You have excellent white phenotypes that are praiseworthy, and then you have terrible white phenotypes because of the environment, because of ideology. Same thing with Arabs, same thing with Persians, same thing with any other group. There are certain Arab phenotypes that are disgusting. I hate them and reject them. Why? Because they're atheistic. They have other kinds of bad qualities in terms of their liberalization or their perversion or whatever. That's the argument against phenotypes. But the genotype, and on the level of genes, I don't think as a theological matter, God has made any particular genotype or race as inherently inferior to anyone else. So that's coming from Islamic belief. And I think that's the reality. Empirically, we can see that different races, there's the good and the bad. And it often is environmental, where you get such a huge variation between, whites that are in certain areas with certain ideology, with certain religion versus other whites. Same with Arabs, same with blacks. So that's my analysis of race.
Keith, final closing statement here. I'll let you finish off.
Oh, you gotta do closing statement. Well, look, it was it was good. It was a spirited debate. Look, I think Daniel kind of proved my point to an extent when he said that the immigrants are here essentially as a way to limit the power of white people, limit the potential of white people having ultimate sovereignty over their homeland. I mean, that's basically the argument I make. It's the argument I make for why we shouldn't have it. I mean, implicit in that is that it's not good for us. It limits our sovereignty. It limits our self-understanding, and that's why I'm opposed to it. The rest of it, I mean, look, you could go into detail on the history of colonialism and expansionism, and I think if we wanted to tot it up, some groups would probably come out worse than white people, and I think Daniel being Persian and Islamic himself mightn't be too happy with the score on that. And I think some of the hypotheticals were kind of missing the point. But look, I didn't expect us to really come to some great agreement here tonight. Clearly, we're kind of operating from different places on this. We have different interests. But I guess I'll say something nice about Daniel since it was so heated. I mean, I do appreciate. I saw the ADL came after him this year, and he's like one of the few Muslim voices in the West I saw who actually calls out Jewish supremacy specifically and studied the Talmud and talks about the passages in the Talmud that justify Jewish supremacy. I think that's important because I do see a lot of kind of Muslim voices in the West that just do this sort of left-wing anti-colonial criticism of Israel. Israel is the Nazis. This is another Holocaust, and are kind of scared to make that critique. So I think it takes a certain moral courage to draw the ire of the ADL and highlight that. But ultimately, I think the perspective Daniel's expressing in terms of this kind of Ludditism of we have to go back to 20th century, 19th century technology, and it's better for everyone to be 80 IQ because they'll be more traditional. So I don't think this really represents the traditionalist view or even necessarily the Islamic view. I think Daniel has his own unique takes on this. I don't think it's a very appealing worldview or alternative. I certainly don't think it's going to appeal to Europeans in great numbers in the way he expresses it. And so, yeah, ultimately, we both agree there's huge demographic change happening. We both agree on the forces that are leading this and causing this and the resentment that is driving some people to perpetuate this. And Daniel agrees that the immigrants being here is an obstacle to white collectivism. So I think the solution is obvious. Since we're agreed that it's not good for white people, we agree that it's happening. Then obviously the message is that we need to reverse it. And as I said in the opening statement, it's not just necessary, but it's moral and it's inevitable.
Yeah, Daniel, I think that hadith sounded sufficient to me for your closing statement. But if you have something, I didn't ask you specifically if you had a final statement.
Yeah, I'll just tie it up with reiterating the comments that I made. Again, I appreciate Keith Woods and his Ban the ADL movement and some of the other work that he's been doing. I appreciate that for sure. Even though I strongly disagree with other points that he's making and bringing up, especially a couple of weeks ago. But I'm not trying to police white people or police white discourse. I'm just someone who is making observations and pointing out what I feel are logical contradictions in the white identitarian discourse. Could I be wrong? Perhaps. But I think that someone like Keith, who is as smart as Keith Woods, or someone as smart as Nick Fuentes, or any of these other white identitarians, they should not see my comments as an attempt to police the white race or to police white identity. It's pointing out contradictions or this kinds of inconsistency. When you, on the one hand, praise tradition, or in the case of some of the religious white identitarians, you praise religious tradition or the Catholic Church, and then you turn around on the other side and you basically dump on Muslims, or you poop on Muslims for having low IQ, for being, this kind of, or not even just Muslims, but also Haitians or whatever race. Like, that is a contradiction. That is not consistent. If you want to praise technology and science, that means praising IQ. And IQ is inversely correlated with being a traditional person, believing in God, believing in a collective identity. Like, this is a major inconsistency that I don't see white identitarians acknowledge. The other inconsistency that I really focused on in this debate is the inconsistency when it comes to the claim, this kind of moral argument that we want equality for all of the races of the people, all the races of the world with their own countries. And this is an equitable solution. Why can't we preserve our white nation? Okay, fine. Like, let's grant all that. Every race deserves to be protected and to be preserved. But the status quo of just having your own country and just a gentleman's agreement, like what already exists with the UN post World War II, that's not really a solution that actually creates equality. That is just going to perpetuate the kinds of structural inequalities and the oppression that we have seen historically. I wish there was a historical counterexample, but we just have 300 years to go on. And what the Europeans have done in the past 300 years are tremendous atrocities. And it doesn't really help someone like Keith or Nick Fuentes or whoever else, or any white identitarian, to deny that history. Like, why would you deny it? Like, you can deny, like, I can accept that Muslims historically have done very wrong things. But I appeal to the higher ideals of Islam, and I say that those Muslims were wrong. What they did violated the ideals of my religion. But I don't see that kind of self-reflection or accountability from these white identitarians, and that actually makes their position a lot weaker, because it indicates to more educated people, like people that are not just wignats on Rumble or Twitter, that you're not historically literate and you're not willing to acknowledge why the world today is the way it is, because of these factors, like these socio-cultural, geographic dynamics that have existed in the recent past, recent modernity. So this is something that this is an inconsistency that also needs to be acknowledged. And the third inconsistency is what Keith referred to in my past debates, is this idea that liberalism as an ideology is primarily the enemy of white collective identity, and any kind of collective identity on the basis of race, religion, ethnicity, or culture. Liberalism is a force to destroy all of the world's cultures and all of the racial distinctions in the world, as well as humanity itself, because of these kinds of the combination of liberalism and the advancement of technology and technological progressivism. That is what is the disaster that is afflicting all of us. And we have to acknowledge that that's the case, instead of saying that you're reducing everything to, oh, there are a lot more black people in my neighborhood, that's what's causing the problems. Or there are more Arabs, or there are more Muslims. Yeah, there can be problems actually because of mass immigration, specifically when it's done in a kind of weaponized way, which I did not deny. And I'm not necessarily an absolute supporter of mass immigration to the West. I defended that position in this debate, but actually, I don't want Muslims to necessarily come to the West so that they can be liberalized and become secularists and atheists after 1 or 2 or 3 generations, as has been happening. Whenever Muslims ask me in the Muslim world, hey, is it a good idea for me to emigrate to the United States or to Europe? I tell them, no. Actually, if you want to have a marriage, if you want to have a traditional family, stay in your own countries. Don't come into the Western nations where liberalism reigns supreme. And they say, well, Daniel, actually now those same kind of policies are coming to my country. And I say, gee, that's terrible. Gee, that really sucks. This is what globo homo is. This is what liberalization is doing to the world and its people. And this is a cancer that we have to address, but we can only address it if we are consistent on the basis of principle, recognizing it for the problem that it is. So that's my concluding statement.
That was
Appreciate
a heavy,
you.
concluding statement. Keith, I want you to be able to respond because Daniel started the debate. If you have anything to respond here.
Well, we both did our concluding statements. I think I'm fine to leave it there.
All right.
I appreciate the
both.
discussion for both of you guys. Thanks.
This is great. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much
Keith.
for coming on.
Thank you.
Obviously, you could find Keith Woods, your Substack mods, if we could pin that in the chat. And as well, you guys know the Muslim Skeptic YouTube channel, or Daniel, if you have anything else that you want to plug. I appreciate you both for coming on. We'll make sure to share your links around. I think this is a cordial debate. I appreciate both of you. I didn't have to do much moderating. I hope you think that it was fair, and I hope to have future discussions like this, and of course ban the ADL. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Dinko.
Thanks, guys.